Hello, everyone. Welcome back to A Motorsports Addict. Today, we're talking about the drama-packed San Marino Grand Prix at Misano, where Marc Marquez made a stunning return to the top step of the podium. It's unbelievable, but Marc has suddenly scored back-to-back victories for the first time in 3 years. I'd be amazed if you're not surprised at this turn of events. Before we talk about the main race, though, let's give the sprint race an honorable mention for the shock twist that occurred at the checkered flag. That sprint. That sprint was quite exciting, wasn't it? Jorge Martin absolutely shocked everyone by taking the sprint win. And the biggest surprise was that he beat Pecco Bagnaia in dominant fashion in the process. Who would have thunk it possible? We're going to discuss the lead up to the race and the actual event. How did Marc Marquez pull off this astounding win in the main race? And what happened to the pre-race favorites? Indeed, what happened to the main protagonists in the MotoGP title race? What happened to Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia in the main race? Before we get into it, though, I want to plead for your support for this channel. Please give this video a like, as this tells the algorithm to push the video to more viewers. Please leave a comment telling me your opinion about anything in the video, and perhaps you have something you want me to discuss, perhaps you have a question. Please let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you. If you haven't done so already, please also subscribe to the channel, and please hit the bell icon to get a notification whenever I post a video. I would be most grateful if you would share this video with someone who might like it. In a nutshell, I'm asking you to please like, subscribe, comment, and share this video. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. Now, let's get back to the race. Pecco was expected to dominate the San Marino Grand Prix weekend, considering his history at Misano. You see, Misano is home to the VR46 Academy. And so, Misano is VR46 and VR46 is Misano. It's been that way since the days of the great Valentino Rossi. The stands are always filled with fans in their bright yellow VR46 team merchandise. The crowd absolutely loves Valentino and, by extension, his band of brothers. Since Vale retired, Pecco has become the surrogate darling of the crowd, especially now that he's won the World Championship twice, and he comes home as the reigning world champion. When Pecco and the VR46 boys race at Misano, they are viewed as heroes. They are the absolute sweethearts of the crowd. The fact that Misano is a home race for Pecco and other members of the VR46 Academy always makes it special. The squad have a lot of track days and practice sessions at the Marco Simoncelli racetrack, and so they are very familiar with the circuit. At the start of the race weekend, Morbidelli made reference to the VR46 squad's connection to the racetrack by declaring that he knows a few things about the circuit. And that was putting it very mildly, because without a doubt, Morbidelli should know this track like the back of his hands. And he has won on this circuit before, even as recently as 2020. And this explains why 3 VR46 riders, Pecco, Franco, and Bezzecchi, locked out the front row of the grid for both the sprint and the main race. It also explains why Morbidelli scored his first podium in years during that sprint race. Go figure. But I digress. Let's get back to Pecco's record at Misano. Bagnaia always seems to be super inspired to go well here. It's where he won his first MotoGP podium in 2020. And who won that race? A certain Franco Morbidelli, also from VR46. Do you see a pattern here? The VR46 boys seem to go well here. In fact, Pecco won here in 2021 and 2022. And last year, he finished third in both the sprint and the main race on his way to his successful defense of his MotoGP world title. So Pecco has a string of podiums at Misano, going back to the COVID-related doubleheaders in 2020. You might recall that he finished the first race in second place, but crashed out of race 2 a week later. I think it's safe to say that Pecco loves Misano. What do you think? Let me know what you think in the comments. So, when it was announced that Misano would host back-to-back races this year, it was assumed that Pecco would dominate both weekends with his VR46 Academy squad mates in close attendance. But Jorge didn't get that memo, or he didn't read it, or he just didn't care. Because he beat Bagnaia thoroughly, comprehensively in the sprint. And he could very well do so again on Sunday, thus widening the gap between them in the championship race. That gap had grown to 23 points after Aragon, and it increased to 26 after Martin won the sprint. And you know that 26 points is more than a race victory. A 26-point gap means that even if Martin failed to finish a race, which Pecco won, Jorge would still be leading the championship by a single point. At this stage of the season, it's the kind of advantage that an experienced and mature champion can manage until he takes the title. Because at that point, the pressure is on the rider who's behind and not on the rider who's leading the championship. The rider in front, in this case Jorge Martin, doesn't need to take as many risks as the rider who is pursuing him in the championship. Pecco would be having to score more points than Martin every single weekend until he had closed the points gap. Whereas Jorge Martin would only capitalize on the weekends where he's actually faster to score the maximum points and ensure that he doesn't lose too many points to Bagnaia on the weekends where he's weaker. I know it sounds easy when I say it like this, but those are the sort of calculations that go into the end game, the final races of the season. After the sprint race disappointment, everyone expected or hoped that Pecco could bounce back on Sunday. And why not? You will agree that one loss does not define the champion. It's also notable that while Jorge has dominated most of the Saturday sprints, Pecco has actually won more Sunday races than Martin and all the other riders combined. Yes, let that sink in. Pecco has won more Sunday races than all the other riders put together. That's how dominant he's been. In fact, by the end of the Austrian Grand Prix weekend, Bagnaia had won 7 out of 11 GPs, yet he's trailing Martin in the championship. So this was a must-win race for Pecco. He simply needed to avoid allowing Martin to build an insurmountable lead in the championship. He needed to win this race, or at least score more points than Jorge. And he would need the help of his VR46 squad members as much as possible. He had the pace, the form, and of course, the passionate home crowd behind him. And the fans turned up to play their part. If anyone could turn things around, why not Pecco Bagnaia at Misano on a Sunday afternoon ride in front of the home fans? Would you bet against Pecco really? And the fans turned up to cheer him on. Rossi's Yellow Army did not disappoint. They were there in droves, chanting, singing, cheering, supporting, and hopefully inspiring Pecco and his fratelli. his brothers to a dominant performance. As it was in the sprint, the riders lined up as they qualified. Pecco on pole, with his fellow VR46 squad mates alongside him. Martin started from fourth place on the second row due to his struggles in qualifying. I already covered the sprint race in a previous episode of this podcast, so please check out that episode to see my perspective on the San Marino sprint race. The stage was set for Sunday's main event. After the sprint victory, all eyes were on Jorge Martin to see if he could follow it up with another victory in the main race. And after Saturday, people had started to wonder if Martin was not the man to beat. He also had momentum, and he was riding with so much confidence. There was simply no beating Martin on Saturday, and he had scored an important psychological blow against Pecco by taking the sprint victory. So it was game on for Sunday. Even Bagnaia admitted after the sprint race that Martin was just on another level, and he simply couldn't keep up with him. But as we saw on Sunday, MotoGP is very unpredictable. Let's dive into the main race. As the race started, Bagnaia got a good getaway ahead of Morbidelli, Martin, and Acosta and the rest of the pack. Jorge could see Pecco trying to open up a gap at the front, and he knew that he had to get on his tail as soon as possible. Martin immediately challenged Morbidelli to claim second position. I had expected Morbidelli to put up a determined fight against Martin, but he was dropped very quickly as the two title contenders set a blistering pace at the front. I was rather disappointed in Morbidelli's performance at this point. I thought he would go well on the track due to his familiarity with it. And I thought he would put up a strong challenge against Martin, but he clearly didn't have the pace. Martin dropped Morbidelli very fast, and he was soon contesting the race lead with Bagnaia. At this point, Jorge was looking strong. Jorge was clearly looking poised to capitalize on his sprint race victory. But then disaster struck. The rain came down, and the riders were forced to make a very crucial judgment call without much time to deliberate on their options. In a wet race situation, the riders have to decide when to ride into the pits to swap their race bikes, which have been prepared for a dry race setup, with their spare bike that has wet weather tires and settings for the more difficult conditions on track. One of the most crucial tricks of the trade is knowing just when to time this bike swap. Over the years, Marc Marquez and a few other riders have made a name for themselves due to their ability to manage the changing conditions and their knack for being able to judge the absolute right time to pit to change their bikes. The risks are huge. You pit too early and you destroy your wet tires. You pit too late and you crash out, or you lose time to those who stopped earlier. Sometimes the right thing to do is not to pit at all because the conditions are not quite right for a wet bike. And the riders just have to know how to manage the bike on a damp or drying track, and then to know how to go faster as a track dries out. It's all an art, and it's all down to the riders' instincts and experience. The riders have to make this call all on their own. In F1, in endurance racing, and indeed in most forms of four-wheeled circuit racing, the drivers usually discuss such calls with their pit crews, who provide varying degrees of guidance depending on the rules of the particular series. If you watch F1, you're no doubt familiar with drivers and the race engineers discussing when to come in. Do you want to come in now? Track is still too wet. box, 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 box. But this is not the case with MotoGP. And this is the root of the dilemma that all the riders faced as the clouds released the rain. After running wide and almost falling off the bike, Martin made a judgment call. He decided to pit for his wet bike as the rain seemed to be getting more intense. Alas, it was the wrong call. And that was the moment his race took a nosedive and any chance of victory was lost. To be honest, the rain call was tough. It was one of those moments when you absolutely had to make the right call. If you got it right, you would reap the maximum results and go home a hero. But if you got it wrong. But here's the thing. For background, the rain didn't actually catch any of the teams or the riders out. At least it wasn't supposed to. The weather forecasts had predicted rain. Everyone knew it was coming. And in fact, no one expected it to be heavy because the weather forecast said it would be fleeting rain. So it wasn't like the rain wasn't expected. We knew the rain was coming. We all knew it was going to be a light shower. We all knew it was not going to fall for too long. This was discussed extensively in the pre-race show. And so the rain didn't come as a surprise to any of the riders. So what happened? Nonetheless, when the rain came down, it was natural for the riders to be cautious. All the riders slowed down and picked their way around the track as carefully as possible to avoid crashing. Martin also noticed the rain and slowed down like everyone else. But he suffered a moment going around the corner and ran wide. This was the point where he decided that the conditions were too risky to continue riding around, so he pitted on lap 7, while the other riders elected to continue braving the conditions on their dry race bikes. I noticed a few of the Aprilias followed him in. That pit stop was the turning point. Because rather than continue, the rain eased off almost immediately, leaving Martin stuck with a wet setup on a rapidly drying track, and he was never able to recover from that. It's one of those split-second decisions that can make or break a race, or indeed a season. Had the rain kept coming, we might be talking about Jorge Martin walking away with another win. What if after Martin came in, the rain actually intensified and Pecco crashed? We would now be praising Martin for his instincts and the fact that he would have opened up an even more significant gap in the World Championship. And it's on these fine lines and small margins that championships are won and lost. Instead of the win, Martin was forced to settle for a disappointing 15th place finish, which is going to hurt in the championship standings. No doubt it was a huge missed opportunity for Martin, especially with the championship battle against Bagnaia so tight. Pecco, for his part, rode a very measured race. He played it safe, knowing Martin was out of contention after that mistake. In an interview after the race, Pecco explained, as soon as it started to rain, I saw him enter the box, and in my mind, everything changed. I said, okay, I have to not crash because he will take 0 points. I don't understand why Martin entered the pits. Running in second place, he was right behind Pecco Bagnaia. Pecco was the only man he needed to monitor and possibly beat. The safest thing to do was to shadow Bagnaia and do exactly what he did. If Bagnaia stayed out, Martin needed to stay out. And if Bagnaia decided to pit, Martin really should pit too. That was the safest option, to simply copy his rival. But for some inexplicable reason, Martin decided to take the initiative and do things his own way. I put it down to inexperience on his part. But whatever it was, Martin's race was destroyed. Martin would later explain that he and his team had not really discussed the weather, and as such, they had no strategy to deal with potential rain. Once again, you have to put this down to inexperience on the part of Martin and the entire Pramac team. Because you would imagine that weather is one of the priority issues they'd discuss and account for on any race weekend. And once there's a threat of rain, you would imagine that they would have played out various scenarios and developed different strategies to deal with some of the different events that might occur during the race. But the Pramac team didn't speak about it. As Martin stated, we didn't speak about it. I didn't know exactly what was coming. So that's why maybe I stopped. For sure, it's really important to communicate with the team. And maybe this time we missed a bit of understanding between us. I mean, it was 100% my fault. But yeah, it's always useful to get feedback and have more information before the race. Shocking. And while all of this was unfolding, Marc Marquez was watching and biding his time. He showed classic racecraft, reading the conditions perfectly and capitalizing when other riders faltered. Marquez saw an opening and a chance for victory. Starting from ninth place, he was not really in contention for the win once Pecco and Martin had streaked away at the front. But the intervention of the rain changed the course of the race, giving Marquez a sniff of a chance to get back on terms with the leaders. And you know, Marc Marquez is a shark. Once he smells blood, he zones in for the kill. Marc suddenly came alive as the other riders tiptoed around the track. Marquez sensed his chance to grab the lead, and he took it, just like he had done in Aragon and countless times in his career. Marquez showed that there isn't a better rider in changing or dodgy conditions. This weekend was no different. When the other riders became tentative, Marc was assured and assertive. This was vintage Marquez. As Martin pulled into the pits, Marc swung into action, taking advantage of the momentary confusion, as some riders probably wondered if they should be following Martin into the pits. Marquez overtook all the riders ahead of him and challenged Pecco to take the lead by the end of the 8th lap. He made his moves at just the right moment, and once he had made his way to the front, there was no looking back. As the track dried, Marquez set a blistering pace, challenging Pecco to keep up. This was Marc at his best. Peerlessly and fearlessly fast. Aggressive but fluid. Inch perfect precision in full flow. This was Marc Marquez, and there are few riders who can match him when he's on song. As the laps counted down, Marquez went on the attack, picking up the pace as Bagnaia tried to stay on his tail. As he continued to attack, he broke Pecco's resolve. He basically kept forcing Pecco to consider how much he was willing to risk the 20 points he would win for second place for a chance to take 5 additional points for the win. Marquez continued to manage the changing conditions like the talented, seasoned alien professional that he is. And that's how he sealed the deal on this second win since joining the Gresini Ducati team. And let's not forget the context here. Marquez came into this weekend with something to prove. He's been struggling for consistency with Gresini. But Aragon, the previous race weekend, was a turning point. After his first win, Marc was feeling more confident as his move to Gresini was vindicated. I imagine that Marc was also keen to prove that his Aragon win was no fluke. But there's also one additional factor to note. Misano is Team Gresini's home race. And everyone in the team, from the mechanics and crew to their riders, the Marquez brothers, Alex and Mark, and all their machines and equipment, all wore a special livery in tribute to their founder, the late Fausto Gresini. Mark dedicated his race win to Fausto and the entire Gresini team. This victory in their home race was absolutely the best result for the team and the best gift that Marcus could give them to show his gratitude for their taking the chance on him this season. After the race, Marcus joked that he looked to the heavens and pleaded with Gresini founder Fausto to send down a few drops of rain for his boy. He said once the rain began to fall, he focused his eyes on local boy Pecco Bagnaia and decided to copy anything that Pecco did. And since Pecco opted to stay out, clearly meant that he did not believe that the rain would last for very long. So Marcus copied him and stayed out too. Pecco would later explain that being from the area, he was able to tell from the smell of the air that the rain was not going to be heavy. This totally blew my mind. I guess it's a reminder that you should never underestimate the power of local knowledge. This win shows that Marquez is not done yet, not this season by any chance. Marquez is back, and if he's able to maintain this form, he could still throw a wrench in the title fight between Bagnaia and Martin. And you'll agree that Mark certainly knows a thing or two about winning world championships. So it's not implausible for him to put together a string of race wins to close the points gap, especially if they're also taking points off each other. With 7 rounds to go, there are still enough points left to win for Mark to mount a serious challenge and force things to go down to the wire. And speaking of Bagnaia, it's interesting how this weekend unfolded. He went from being the favorite to win both the sprint and the main race to finishing second in both races. Pecco played it smart though. He knew Martin's pit stop blunder opened the door for him to regain some valuable points. And he's experienced enough by now to know that he doesn't need to risk too much. So Pecco initially tried to fight back, closing in on Mark and putting pressure on the multiple world champion who will be his teammate next season. But as the race wound down, Pecco seemed to realize that Mark could not be beaten, or at least not easily. Or perhaps he decided that it wasn't worth the risk. With Martin dropping out of contention for the win, second place was good enough to erode the points gap to Jorge Martin. He could take the second and live to fight another day. On a day when Pecco's main rival for the title had given him an open goal, it was best not to risk it all for an extra 5 points. Or what do you think? Should Pecco have gone for the win? Please let me know what you think in the comments. The championship race is tighter than ever. Bagnaia is now only 7 points behind Martin. And you have to wonder on what side the momentum lies. This season is clearly one for the ages. Just when you think one rider has the season under control, we suddenly witness another twist, and the lead changes again. And then again. If I had $1 million for every time the lead has changed this season, I'd be a very, very rich man. So, the momentum. Where would you say the momentum lies right now in the championship? Who is feeling more confident going into the second weekend? Even though Pecco is behind by 7 points, can we conclude that he's feeling stronger? Can he make up for the disappointment of the first weekend by winning the next set of races? Can he still fulfill his promise for Misano? Or are we to say that Martin is still on top, despite the mishap last time around? What do you think? Do you think Martin can stun Pecco by winning both the sprint and the main race on Sunday to reopen the gap to Pecco and Marquez? Speaking today on Friday, the first day of the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix weekend, I can already tell you that Pecco is at his best. He's already topped both free practice sessions, while Martin and Marquez have put in very strong performances. So it's very clearly a three-horse race this weekend. I want to hear what you think about Martin versus Pecco in the comments. Who do you think has the greater momentum and confidence at this point? Do you think 7 points is enough buffer for Martin to feel confident going into this weekend? And we can already see why Ducati made the move to sign Marquez for the Ducati factory squad in 2025. I'm sure that Gigi and the rest of the Ducati senior brass are feeling vindicated by Marquez's recent string of results and the fact that you can't count him out of the championship race just yet, despite the fact that he's on an older bike. Admittedly, he might only have a slim chance to win the World Championship, but that's still a lot better than two other riders on factory GP24s, Bastianini and Morbidelli, who have absolutely no chance to win the championship at all this season. And after this performance, you can see that Marquez still has what it takes to compete at the highest level. But before I get carried away in talking about 2025, let's not forget the big picture here. Like I said, the 2024 title race is wide open. While we've got Bagnaia and Martin trading blows, Marquez is back in the mix, and there's no telling how this is going to play out in the remaining races. MotoGP is definitely delivering some of the most intense racing we've seen in years. And with the stakes this high, every mistake and every win is magnified. The championship race is most likely going down to the wire, and we'll be here to cover and enjoy every twist and turn. It's going to be a wild ride to the end of the season. Who do you expect to come out on top? Can Martin recover from his Misano first weekend misstep? Can Bagnaia take the crown, or is Marquez ready to play spoiler and shake things up even more? These are all great questions, I think. Please let me know what you think in the comments. And that's all we have time for on this episode of A Motorsports Addict. Thank you for tuning in, and please be sure to subscribe and like us for more motorsports coverage. Thank you very much. And if you haven't done so already, please give this video a like and please share it with someone that might enjoy it. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you next time. Enjoy the race weekend. Take care.